I'm Larry Smarr again, the director of Cal IT2 at UCSD, where we'll be tomorrow night. This is a really exciting panel for me because I have been having the good fortune to work very closely with Australia over the last couple of years, thanks to Phil Scanlan's Australian-American Leadership Dialogue, which for 15 years has been the primary vehicle for high-level discussions between Australia and America. And I was there for 3 weeks in October, giving talks from one end of the country to the other. And it's a fascinating country to think about in the era of the rise of Asia. So we've got some great people here assembled. They've come a long way to talk to you. And I want to just get right into it. Phil, you have a new job as well. You're now Australia's Consul-General to the U.S. in New York. Just gotten there. Tell us a little bit about the history of our involvement, but then also what have you been seeing since you've been walking the streets of Manhattan?
Well, thank you very much, Larry, and it was nice to be on the other end of the Opti portal 12 months ago, and here we are in real life. Well, the history of the relationship between the United States and Australia is 60 years of an alliance, which has just been upgraded. 2 years ago, we signed a defence treaty which really brings digital coupling to the military and intelligence aspect of the relationship. And since, for the last quarter century, Australia has been cumulatively becoming part of the global grid. And as we've been doing that, we also have been engaging the West Coast. Our university system is very like the University of California system here. And in addition to that, with places like Stanford, we've been connecting with people like you so that we can identify the drivers of innovation. And the universities have become, in Australia, the data-intensive research centres have been getting connected through the Opti Portal Global Collaboratory so that we're moving on the innovation platform. And then in addition to that, if you take Mark Hurd's comments this morning about strategy, operations and people, we've got a national narrative that explains where we're heading. And then we've got the operational side, which is in relation to the national broadband network rollout. And that relates to the people aspect as well. Now, in terms of being in New York and looking at Australia's sort of place as Asia rises, which is the theme here, it's very interesting that a number of people who are global investors who've got systems around Earth and are saying, hey, let's have a look at the time zones. And in the next 5 years, we've got existing, in addition to the existing investments in the Asia Pacific, we're going to add quite a lot more. Where are we going to put the domicile in that time zone in our global system around Earth? And by a process of logic, they've concluded that Australia is the place, and that's been a pleasant surprise.
Well, that's really, I can see it. It gives you exactly that positioning you want in a country that is very like ours in UK and Europe and rule of law, respect for intellectual property, and happens to speak English. But let's talk about a little bit more this national broadband network. Simon Hackett, you're not only CEO of Internode, an internet service provider, so you've seen both the private side, you're seeing this rollout. I don't think everybody here probably understands what a visionary, high role Australia has done here. Could you explain a little bit about what the NBN is? And then from a private sector point of view, how do you see it?
Sure, Larry. It's been quite an interesting change for us in Australia to produce a very short bit of history about this. The national broadband network in Australia, this is kind of the second coming of it. For the last few years, the government's been talking about a national broadband network in Australia, but their idea of it was basically fiddling around the edges with the existing copper network with wires that are 40, 50 years old, and delivering an incremental upgrade to that, which would have meant that in 10 years' time, Australia would have been at 50 megabits when the better parts of the world had been at a gigabit. It's clearly not a great thing. people like me had stood up in trade shows and conferences saying, you know, this is just fiddling around the edges. You obviously need to have the bravery to deliver fibre to the home, to find a way to do that in Australia. But it went without saying that the government at the time just wouldn't pony up that amount of money, 8, 10 times as much money as they've been talking about for the incremental upgrades to the copper network. And two things happened in the last 6 months. The global financial crisis, which actually gave the current government in Australia the most remarkably good impetus to do something exciting, to actually use that adversity to create an opportunity and decide to make a massive investment. And they did a backflip that we're all quite positively surprised about. They decided to do the thing that the industry in Australia had been saying for decades should happen. You should make the next 40 to 50 year investment and put a fibre network out instead of a copper one. So the new government vision in Australia is to do the thing that we've always needed, to deliver fibre links all the way to premises in Australia, to at least 90% of those premises, 100 megabit to gigabit capable at least, to deliver that on a wholesale-only basis to fix a structural problem that Australia has with the way that Telstra was privatised, that meant that it was never structurally separated first. So this network will be wholesale-only and produce a new level playing field that will coexist with the existing copper network and its ways of doing broadband. And the net result for a service provider in Australia is a fabulous thing, and indeed for customers in Australia, because we'll have this substrate to work in, which will take us in 8 to 10 years into the gigabit era on a national basis and be a fantastic platform for innovation. At the same time, the copper network will still be there to hold competitive tension up in the marketplace to make sure that the pricing actually stays under control as well. So it's exciting times.
Well, that's amazing. Just as the fibre to the home is being rolled out, the thing that I have worked with Australia so closely for is that it had already in the AARNet, the Australian Advanced Research Network, between its universities, it had a very advanced optical network, and also from Australia to the United States. Indeed, many of you last year remember when we did this live hookup with Phil and others talking to us in the auditorium. That was over that network, and we're fortunate enough to have gotten Chris Hancock, the CEO of that network, to come here. And as you know, from working with Cal IT2, the universities really are meant to be out there 5 or 10 years ahead of the broad commercial base. So Australia certainly is doing that. But I thought, Chris, you could talk a little bit more about the relationship as we go forward of the universities to one of the most advanced commercial mass market optical networks of any country in the world.
Thank you, Larry, and thanks for introducing AARNet. I don't have to do that, that's good. I think that you've got to look back at the rationale of what this government have done, and while Simon's right about the GFC, there's two things that this government has got. The first is that the digital economy is all pervasive, and that everything they're doing now, they're thinking in those terms. And that might sound really basic to an audience like this, but that's a big leap. The other thing that's really interesting, and only a day ago, the fibre to the home ranking scale was produced. And guess what? In the top 10, the top 4 are our Asian neighbours in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan and Hong Kong. And when you talk about the penetration rates, for example, South Korea, you're up at 45% of fibre to the home and 30% for some of the others. Australia, was in a position where it was equivalent to, I think, 0.1%. So a big differential. That allows us now to be part of that. The time zone lines up particularly with our Asian neighbours, and that allows us to play in that environment very much so. And I think whilst there'll be critique about these sorts of initiative, it's the vision that needs to cut through. So the critique is around the cost, or is around why does my kid need 100 megabits to the home when he's already spending 6 hours a day on Facebook? Again, this government gets it, and I think that backing has really seen a drive in terms of where this is going. Sure, it's going to be a journey in terms of implementation, but they've already started, and the big start has been twofold. They recognise two things. One is let's fill the black spots. So we've actually had a review called the Black Spots Review, where 250 million is for the sorts of things that the mobile guys talked about and the other sessions talked about. Fill those gaps, fill those holes. Tell us what we need to do straight away.
And the second thing they've asked for is regulatory reform. So this is a big number, $43 billion. I don't know what you transpired it in terms of US dollars, but
so
we're
it's
talking...
$43 billion for the build out to 90% of the buildings
Yep.
in Australia. Since Australia has roughly 1/12 of our population, that translates up into something like $350 billion that the U.S. would have to invest to have something comparable on a per capita basis, and I think we're currently focused on about $7 billion.
So there's a recognition there that the government has had to intervene, and both on filling the backhaul issues and getting those to bed quickly as possible, and bringing in some regulatory reform. This is a maze, this is the puzzle that has to be really driven hard, and so far the vision is spot on.
Well, Adrian Turner, you're the CEO of Mocana, and I think it's kind of interesting to have an entrepreneur from Australia. I think many people wouldn't associate startups with Australia, and yet you've done it. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit what it's like to do a startup, and then again, from your point of view, as you look forward to this Australia, this digital economy, do you see opportunities as we move forward, and for that matter, in relation to Asia?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to have the experience to build businesses in Australia and in the US, in Silicon Valley. And as an entrepreneur, people think about entrepreneurialism as risk-taking, and I actually think it's not. It's about taking risk out of a situation and stacking the odds in your favor to increase the probability of success. And how do you do that? There's a couple of different things that I look at and related back to Australia. The first one is market, second one is team, third one is technology and the defensibility of the technology, and the fourth one is capital and access to capital. So in Australia, the size of the market is small relative to the US. So inherent in that is the need to have a global outlook from the start. So the DNA of the company is we're a global company. In the US, you can build a fine, big business domestically. In terms of team, it's not only the ability to hire capable people, but also the tolerance for risk. And in Australia, the tolerance for risk is lower than in the US and particularly in Silicon Valley, but it's changing. And it's changing because of success stories like Suntech. Technology spun out of University of New South Wales. Company was founded 7 years ago. This year it's going to do $395 million in revenue and is listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So people can see success in terms of commercializing technology spun out of Australia. In terms of technology, the education system in Australia is fantastic. There's well-educated engineers with lots of capability to build defensible technology. In terms of capital, I think there's an opportunity here actually for some of the people in the room. So Australia, in terms of funds under management, there's about $1.3 trillion in terms of funds under management, but a very, very nascent venture capital infrastructure. I think the largest fund in the country is about $190 million. So when you tie together this new national broadband infrastructure and all the innovation that that's going to spur with an English-speaking, well-educated market that's capable of developing great innovation, there's a huge opportunity to help fund and commercialize some of that innovation.
So one of the things, that I was in Australia 20 years ago they brought me over to see whether this internet was going to be a passing thing or not, and whether they should focus on it and supercomputing, and of course they did. But the universities, the federal support for research in universities in Australia, certainly 20 years ago, was nothing at all like it was in the US. This time when I was back, it seemed to me that there'd been a big change in understanding how critical the universities are as the basis of any innovation economy. And I'd just like to get a sense of that. How do you see them really getting to be the locomotive, if you like, on the train for new ideas that ultimately lead to new companies and so forth? I mean, Phil, you've went from 10 years of having this leadership dialogue between Canberra, the capital of Australia, and Washington, D.C., and then you started out with this West Coast dialogue, which is where we first hooked up. Why'd you do that?
Well, we're nations who share the Pacific, and if you want to build a platform for high community performance on a sustainable basis through 2050 and beyond, then out of Australia, which always thinks qualitatively because the asymmetry is obvious with 21 million people, then you go to the best. And don't blush, Larry, but we got together with you. And then Larry came around Australia to the various data-intensive research centres, and what we discovered was our quality of research in Australia is high. The issue was, how does one become part of the global collaboration initiative? And so what we decided to do was give them a no-brainer proposition. Do you want to continue to contribute 2% of IP to Earth, or do you want to participate, potentially, in the generation of 20-25% IP creation on Earth? And of course the answer is, yea, verily, let's go the second way. And so that led to a conversation about, well, get connected, get with it, get up with the Australian Advanced Research Network, and get with the game, which is, if you want to be in that 20-25% game, then get connected, get with it, and don't think just locally, but think about how you can participate with the best in Earth in your respective fields of chosen endeavour.
I mean, one of the amazing things about fiber to the home is every home is a potential global business at that point, because there's, once you're up in the gigabits per second, resources anywhere on the earth are just like they're where you are, and you're where they are. So the tyranny of distance, which is the slogan in Australia that is always how they think of how they've been disadvantaged all these centuries.
We've got to give that up now.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're going to have to live without that and excuse anymore.
Terrific.
So,
Yep.
but I mean, it seems to me it is a real qualitative change. Chris, what do you?
Well, I think one of the other drivers is science and innovation. So we're talking about broadband, we're talking about telco, but one of the other ministries we have is innovation industry, science and research. And they got the biggest allocation in our budget recently in the history of the country. And they're, in fact, so blatantly, they've called one lot of funding super science, okay? Because they're really trying to drive what's going on in universities. And the example I'll point out, some of you may be aware if there's astronomers in the audience, but we've got literally on our doorstep the largest science experiment in the history of the world, the Square Kilometre Array, which some of you may have read about or heard about, which is a telescope project. We're finalists with South Africa at the moment, but both countries are very, very much working together. Again, our linkage to our Asian neighbours is really important. But just to give you an idea that in 2015, we're talking, these are array dishes spread out across our country. And for those of you who looked at a map of Australia recently, you'll know that there's a lot of people around the edges, but nothing in the middle. So it's a bit of a challenge. But the short haul links on these dishes, for a couple of kilometres the requirements will be 80 gig. We're talking 2015. The long haul links will be 2 terabytes of data. So if that isn't a driver putting us on the world stage, and the government are committed to making sure they understand the opportunity here that to get us on the stage Phil's talking about, there's a real example of where the world will use that facility, which will give us, the sorts of things astronomers haven't had at hundreds and thousands of times the visualisation that they currently got now.
Just as a side effect, we've just finished servicing the Hubble Space Telescope, which is essentially, a global instrument. The Large Hadron Collider is coming online. The Square Kilometre Array is the next great planetary scale science instrument after the Large Hadron Collider. So Simon, I mean, you're a business guy. What about these universities? And I mean, is that important to you or not in Australia? How do you see it?
Oh, it's hugely important. And obviously, the Australian Academic and Research Network was the genesis of the internet in Australia, as indeed, in the academic community was the genesis of it here. I had the privilege to be on the original team that deployed version 1 of that Chris now continues to run back in the mid-'80s. And that in me at the time actually formed the genesis of my business career, because I was sitting in a university environment with access to something that was 1 or 2 orders of magnitude better than was available in a home. And it drove me to realise the point of taking that pointy end in the university sector and commercialising it. As we're talking about today, the same thing's about to happen at gigabit speeds, which is a fantastic thing. So that, and over that 15 and 20 years, the thing that's improved has been the interaction between universities and the commercial sector. It's the university sector, what I was struck by in the US when I started to come here over the last 20 years was how effective the interaction is between the university and the research and development and the commercialisation sectors. And I think that's a lesson Australia has learned. And as we've talked about, the beauty is there's an awful lot of smart people there that've got the hang of that lesson, and they speak the same language, but they're in a different time zone. It's a useful situation.
So Adrian, do you, given that the venture capital world is just beginning to emerge there, but yet, in a way, the innovation may be getting ahead of the ability to fund it locally, what are you seeing as far as foreign investments in Australia for companies using the talent that's really beginning to pour out of there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So in a lot of cases, what's happening is that businesses are moving offshore to seek venture capital in other parts of the world or funding in other parts of the world. And I think that will change. Again, geography and distance isn't as relevant, and a lot of businesses, particularly the types of businesses that can take advantage of this type of infrastructure, can be built anywhere in the world. Geography is less important. The other thing that I see in Australia that I think is unique to Australia, or somewhat unique to Australia, and this ties into entrepreneurialism and building of these companies globally, is leveraging the asset of expatriates. So what Australia has done is built one of the leading expatriate networks in the world, where senior people in industry, across industry, globally, are connected via this network, and there's a value exchange for participation. But one of the ways that people give back is to help make introductions and help give credibility, provide local credibility for companies looking to commercialize internationally.
I had a personal experience with this in Los Angeles the last 6 months, something like that. There was a Good Day USA evening event, black tie, I think, and I couldn't believe the number of Australians that were in LA. It was like a huge ballroom full.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Well, Larry, Adrian's the chairman of that expat network, and just picking up on your question to him, I've had people come to see me in New York in the life sciences and other areas saying, look, we don't actually necessarily want to access IP in Australia to commercialise, but what we want to do is come to Australia and create a new industry there, because that's the logic for us to go. So we would like to bring and source IP commercialisation opportunities from anywhere in the world and set ourselves up there, because you've got one of the biggest private savings pools as well. So it's an interesting counterpoint that's going on that Adrian refers to.
So, one of the things that I was so impressed about is Australia seems not to have gotten itself in the same kind of trouble as some of our countries have financially, and that, this just extraordinary visionary investment in real infrastructure, not in sort of the political mess it seems that we see being made here by our political system. How do you do that? I'm just incredibly respectful of just how adult the whole thing seems to be. What's that about?
Well, it's kind of the other side of the coin of not being big risk takers as far as building businesses, new businesses. The flip side is we're not big risk takers in terms of, financial management. And I think that that's served the country better than other countries over recent times. But I think that also presents an opportunity too for the country. I mean, with the kind of network that you're talking about, broadband network, it opens the door to outsource a completely new class of mid-office, not back office, but mid-office operations. And with Australia being in the same time zone as a lot of our Asian neighbours, I think that's a tremendous opportunity for the country as well.
Yeah, it's actually one really important thing about fibre networks, not just their expandability, but their symmetry. And it's often lost that all of the previous broadband build-outs, ADSL, the A stands for asymmetric.
Yeah.
Wireless that we've been talking about today, its Achilles heel again is actually upload direction. Right. But fibre is intrinsically capable of symmetric performance, so you absolutely can run that mid-office operation from anywhere you happen to be. And that's actually, it's quite transformative in its ability to make it end to end.
Yeah.
And without trying to take a positive spin into a negative, we've got our challenges, okay?
Sure.
And if you think about the breadth of this, Larry, 80% of our schools are less than 4 megabits per second connection. Yeah. Okay, so when you think about what Sol was talking about this morning, how do we activate that in this broadband plan over the next 8 years, as the plan is, to be able to really get there? Now, the universities with the schools again are driving the lead, the cutting edge stuff, but again, that's 5 years ahead of where your average school might be in relation to.
Well, Adrian, tomorrow night at Cal-IT, we're going to get a chance to have a working environment at 10 gigabits a second with NASA Ames and Mountain View with the new Lunar Science Institute. And I have to say, living in that environment of pure optical, 10,000 megabits a second, distance really does disappear. You just pretty soon, you got a taste of it last year which was really just a gigabit with Phil and the others in Australia. But I don't know if people really, who haven't lived there, understand how transformational what happens when the whole world is in the glass. I mean, it's like it's not flat, it's just collapsed to a single room,
Right. And I think that's the thing that everyone that visits Cal-IT too picks up if they weren't previously aware of it. I had the privilege of being kind of infected with that knowledge and that understanding of the transformational capacity of the stuff from my involvement with AARNet. But getting that word out is obviously one of the really important functions of Cal-IT too.
Well, we've got, let's get the house lights up. We've got a minute and a half. Let's see if we can get some questions here for the panel. There we go.
Chris Pearson with 3G Americas. With Australia, obviously the Australian competitive market for technology and production and so forth, what key challenges does the Asia Pacific region with really the Goliath China pose for Australia's technology future as well as success?
There we go.
A few things flew through my head then. I think one of the first things is that our Asian partners are all at different levels of development in terms of their research capabilities and their science capabilities. And, it's, some of them are leading the way and others are sort of struggling to get up there. But as well as the sort of the tyranny of distance thing we talk about, we're getting more competition in our international cable market, if you like. And if you take a map of cable systems of the world, you'll see quite easily that we're underserved or underdone, if you like, in terms of what comes to Australia. In fact, there are only 3 major routes out of Australia, as opposed to what runs between America and across Europe. So that's a challenge, and I can see that challenge starting to lift as Telstra and Pipe and more players come into that market to really, for all good reasons, to try and drive that. And I think, we're aware of that challenge, but we've got to make sure that we can, the distance on island isn't the only thing we solve.
I've been approached by some people, Chinese leaders, for example, in New York, and they see a collaborative opportunity because they see this rollout of the national broadband network as one of exhibiting innovation against space. And they're saying, well, wait a minute, you know, if you guys get this innovation against space model right, we can learn a hell of a lot from you in some of the remote areas of China. So I think there's many ways to skin this cat.
Well, and with that, I think we're out of time. Thank you all very much.